The emergency alarm screamed through the transport ship as Sergeant Daniel Carter grabbed onto the nearest support beam, his knuckles turning white from the pressure of his grip. The vessel shook violently as another blast struck the hull, sending sparks flying across the narrow corridor where he and his squad had been resting just moments before. "We are under attack," shouted Corporal Amy Brooks from the navigation console, her fingers flying across the controls as she tried to identify their attackers. Her voice carried the edge of panic that came from facing something completely unknown. Daniel rushed toward the observation window and felt his blood run cold at what he saw outside. Dozens of alien ships surrounded their small convoy, their designs unlike anything humanity had encountered before. The vessels were elegant and curved, shimmering with a silver light that seemed almost alive. And they moved through space with a grace that made human ships look primitive by comparison. Communication system crackled with a strange language that the translation software struggled to interpret. After several seconds of processing, a cold and commanding voice filled the ship, demanding immediate surrender and promising destruction to any who resisted. "Those are Cathari ships," whispered Lieutenant Chris Palmer, his face pale as he recognized the design from classified intelligence briefings. The Cathari were spoken of in hushed tones among military commanders, a species that had conquered 47 worlds and had never lost a single war in their entire history. Daniel turned to his squad, seeing the fear in their eyes but also the determination that years of training had instilled in them. They were soldiers of Earth, and they would not go down without a fight, no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. "All hands, prepare for boarding," Daniel commanded, checking his weapon and positioning himself near the main airlock. If the aliens wanted to take the ship, they would have to pay for every inch with blood. The Cathari breaching pod attached to their hull with a sound like thunder, cutting through the reinforced metal as if it were paper. When the airlock burst open, Daniel got his first look at the beings who had terrorized this sector of the galaxy for centuries. They were tall, standing nearly 7 feet in height, with silver skin that reflected the emergency lights in strange patterns. Each one had 4 arms that moved with fluid precision, and their faces held features that were almost beautiful in an alien way. With high cheekbones and large eyes that glowed with soft violet light, Daniel opened fire immediately, his weapon blazing in the confined space of the corridor. He saw 2 of the aliens fall before something struck him from behind. A burst of energy that overloaded every nerve in his body and sent him crashing to the floor as consciousness faded. He heard Amy screaming somewhere in the distance, followed by the calm voice of a Cathari soldier speaking into a communication device. The words were translated just before everything went black, and they chilled him to his core. "We have captured a live specimen. Inform Queen Silvery that she will have her human at last." When Daniel woke, he found himself in a cell unlike any prison he had ever seen or imagined. The walls were made of shimmering blue energy that hummed with power, and the floor beneath him was smooth and warm, almost organic in its texture. He tested the energy barriers with his hand and pulled back sharply as pain shot through his fingers. Whatever technology the Cathari used, it was far beyond anything humans had developed, and escape seemed impossible. Hours passed, or perhaps days, as Daniel had no way to measure time in this strange place. He did exercises to keep his body sharp and his mind focused, refusing to let despair take hold of him. He was still a soldier, still bound by his duty, and he would look for any opportunity to escape or gather information. A Cathari guard approached his cell, this one wearing armor that marked him as someone of importance. The alien studied Daniel with those glowing violet eyes, tilting his head in what might have been curiosity or contempt. "Human." The guard spoke through a translation device attached to his collar. "You are to be brought before Queen Silthery herself. Consider this the greatest honor your primitive species has ever received." Daniel stood tall and met the alien's gaze without flinching. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing fear, even though his heart pounded in his chest like a war drum. "Lead the way," he replied, his voice steady despite the terror that lurked beneath the surface. The guards escorted him through corridors of crystal and light, and Daniel made mental notes of everything he observed. The architecture was beautiful, but also functional, with defensive positions built into the walls and security checkpoints at regular intervals. The Cathari were not just conquerors, but also architects of incredible skill. Other aliens stopped to stare as Daniel passed, their conversations dying as they watched the strange creature being led through their sacred halls. He heard whispers that his translator picked up in fragments. Words like primitive and dangerous and death world that he did not fully understand. Finally, they reached a massive door that seemed to be carved from a single piece of glowing crystal. The guards paused and spoke words of reverence before the door slid open, revealing a throne room that took Daniel's breath away. The chamber stretched upward into darkness, with pillars of light supporting a ceiling lost in shadow. The floor was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the glow of countless floating orbs that drifted through the air like lazy fireflies. And there, at the far end of this magnificent hall, sat Queen Silthery upon a throne that seemed woven from pure starlight. She was the most beautiful and terrifying being Daniel had ever seen. Her silver skin was darker than her soldiers, almost pewter in color, and her forearms were adorned with jewelry that sparkled with inner fire. Her eyes were not violet but deep purple, ancient and wise, and filled with an intelligence that seemed to pierce through all deception. "So this is a human," the queen spoke, her voice like music and thunder combined into something that resonated in Daniel's very bones. She rose from her throne and descended the steps toward him, moving with a grace that made her seem to float rather than walk. Daniel stood his ground as she circled him, her eyes examining every detail of his form with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under a microscope. He supposed that was exactly what he was to her. "You are smaller than I expected," Queen Silthery observed, stopping directly in front of him and looking down at his face. "My advisors told me that humans were weak, fragile creatures who had barely mastered space travel. Yet your species has resisted our expansion into the Orion sector for 3 years now, and I wish to understand why." Daniel met her gaze and spoke the only truth he knew. "We fight because we have no other choice. Surrender has never been in our nature, and it never will be." The queen smiled, the expression that showed teeth sharper than any human possessed. "We shall see, little human. We shall see what you are truly made of." Queen Silthery returned to her throne and summoned her chief scientist with a wave of one elegant hand. An elderly Cathari named Voreth shuffled forward, his silver skin showing the darker patches that came with advanced age among his species, and his forearms trembled slightly as he bowed before his sovereign. "Voreth, I want you to examine this human thoroughly," the queen commanded, her purple eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "Discover everything there is to know about his biology, his strengths, his weaknesses. I want to understand how such a primitive species has caused us so much trouble." The old scientist nodded and gestured for the guards to bring Daniel to the examination chambers. As they walked through the corridors, Voreth studied the human with open fascination, muttering observations into a recording device. Remarkable bipedal locomotion. Only 2 arms, yet still functional. External auditory organs. What curious evolutionary choices. Daniel remained silent, conserving his energy and continuing to observe everything around him. He noticed that the Cathari moved differently than humans, their bodies seeming to glide rather than walk. And he wondered if their homeworld had different gravity than Earth. The examination chamber was filled with equipment that looked more like art than science. Floating spheres scanned Daniel from every angle, projecting images of his internal organs onto screens that surrounded the room. Voreth watched with growing interest as the data began to flow. "Remove your upper garment," Voreth instructed, and Daniel complied, revealing the scars that covered his torso from years of combat and training. The old scientist leaned closer, his violet eyes widening as he examined the healed wounds. "These marks indicate significant trauma. How did you survive such injuries without medical intervention?" Daniel shrugged. "Humans heal. It takes time, but our bodies repair themselves if we can survive the initial damage." Voreth made a noise of disbelief and ordered more detailed scans. What the machines revealed made the scientist take several steps backward, his forehands trembling as he reviewed the data. "This cannot be correct," he whispered, running the analysis again and again. Each time, the results came back the same, and each time, Voreth grew more disturbed. Over the following days, Daniel was subjected to countless tests. They measured his bone density and found it to be nearly 3 times greater than any Kethari. They analyzed his muscle fibers and discovered efficiency ratings that should have been impossible. They cut his skin and watched in horror as the wound began closing within hours. Voreth worked through rest cycles, forgetting to eat as he compiled his findings. The more he learned about human biology, the more frightened he became. These creatures were not the weak primitives the Kethari had assumed them to be. One test, in particular, left the entire scientific team shaken. They exposed Daniel to atmospheric conditions that would have killed a Kethari within minutes. Yet the human merely coughed and complained of discomfort before adapting to breathe the toxic air. "What manner of beings are you?" Voreth asked, his voice filled with something Daniel had never expected to hear from a Kethari. Genuine fear. Daniel thought about the question carefully before answering. "We are survivors. Our world tried to kill us every day for millions of years, and we refused to die." The scientist requested an audience with Queen Siltheri to present his findings, and the court gathered in the throne room to hear what he had discovered. Nobles and warriors alike fell silent as Voreth began his presentation, displaying images of Earth alongside the data from Daniel's examination. "My queen, honored members of the court, what I am about to share will challenge everything we believed about the humans," Voreth began, his voice trembling. "Their home world is not the gentle paradise we assumed it to be. It is what our ancient texts would call a death world." Murmurs rippled through the assembled Kethari as images of Earth appeared on the floating screens. They saw massive predators with teeth like daggers, storms that could flatten cities, and oceans filled with creatures designed for killing. "The gravity on this planet is significantly higher than our own," Voreth continued. "This explains why human bones are so dense and their muscles so powerful. They evolved under conditions that would crush most species." More images appeared showing microscopic organisms that the scientist identified as bacteria and viruses. Their world is covered with invisible killers that attack from within. The average human body fights off hundreds of these invaders every single day without conscious effort. Queen Siltheri leaned forward on her throne, her expression unreadable as she absorbed this information. The nobles around her shifted uncomfortably, their confidence in Kethari superiority beginning to waver. "But surely they have weaknesses?" one advisor spoke up. "All species have vulnerabilities that can be exploited." Voreth shook his head slowly. "I have searched extensively and found very few. Humans can survive temperature ranges that would kill us in moments. They can go without water for days and without food for weeks. They can lose significant amounts of blood and continue functioning. And most disturbing of all, they possess something we do not fully understand." He brought up the final piece of data, a complex readout of brain activity recorded during Daniel's tests. When pushed to their physical limits, human bodies produce chemicals that allow them to ignore pain and continue fighting. They call this response many things, but the effect is the same. A human who should be dead can continue to move and fight through sheer determination. The throne room fell absolutely silent as the implications sank in. The Cathari had built their empire on the assumption that all species could be broken, that sufficient force would cause any enemy to surrender. But what do you do against an enemy that refuses to accept defeat, even when defeat is certain? Queen Silthery rose from her throne and walked slowly toward Daniel, who had been brought to witness this presentation. She stopped before him and studied his face with new eyes, seeing not a primitive creature, but something far more dangerous. Your species evolved on a world that tried to kill you every moment of every day, she said, her voice soft but carrying through the silent chamber. And yet you survived. You did not merely survive, you thrived. You conquered your death world and reached for the stars. Daniel met her gaze without flinching. We did what we had to do. That is what humans have always done. The queen turned to her court, her expression now showing something that her subjects had never seen from her before. Uncertainty. I begin to understand why our expansion has met such resistance, she announced. We are not fighting a weak species that will break under pressure. We are fighting survivors of a world that makes our own home look like paradise. She looked back at Daniel, and for the first time, she addressed him not as a specimen or a prisoner, but as a representative of his people. I wish to learn more about humanity, Sergeant, and I believe I have found the perfect way to test what Varth has told us. Her smile returned, sharp and dangerous. You will fight in our arena, human. Show me the strength of your species, and perhaps we can avoid a war that would cost both our peoples dearly. The arena of Vareth Prime was an ancient structure that had witnessed thousands of battles over the centuries. Its stone walls stained with the blood of countless species who had faced Cathari champions and failed. Today, for the first time in recorded history, a human would step onto that sacred ground. Daniel stood in the preparation chamber beneath the arena floor, listening to the roar of the crowd above. The sound was deafening. Thousands of Cathari voices united in anticipation of watching their greatest warrior destroy this strange alien creature. A guard entered and threw a simple cloth garment at Daniel's feet. Dress yourself, human. You will fight without armor or weapons. Those are the rules of the sacred arena. Daniel picked up the garment and pulled it on, feeling the rough fabric against his skin. He had fought in worse conditions during his years of training, and the lack of weapons did not concern him as much as the guards expected. His body was a weapon, forged by decades of combat experience. Who will I be fighting? He asked, stretching his muscles and preparing his mind for what was to come. The guard laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the stone walls. You will face Commander Zethron, the greatest warrior our empire has ever produced. He has killed over 200 enemies in this arena and has never been defeated. Your death will be swift, human, which is more mercy than your kind deserves. Daniel said nothing, simply continuing his preparations. He had faced impossible odds before, and he was still breathing. That had to count for something. The gates opened with a grinding of ancient machinery, and Daniel walked out into the blinding light of the arena. The crowd fell silent for a moment, thousands of violet eyes fixed on the small figure that emerged from the shadows. Then erupted into jeers and mockery. The arena floor was covered with fine sand that shifted beneath Daniel's feet, and the walls rose up around him like a bowl, filled with tier after tier of spectators. At the highest point, in a private box draped with royal colors, sat Queen Silthery. Watching with intense interest from the opposite gate emerged Commander Zethron, and Daniel understood immediately why this warrior had never been defeated. The Cathari champion stood nearly 8 feet tall, his forearms thick with muscle and covered in ceremonial scars. His eyes burned with confidence and contempt as he studied the human who dared to face him. This is my opponent? Zethron's voice boomed across the arena, and the crowd responded with laughter. I expected something more impressive. This creature barely reaches my chest. Daniel rolled his shoulders and settled into a fighting stance. Size is not everything. I have beaten larger opponents before. The champion's laughter died, replaced by cold anger at the human's lack of fear. Then you will die knowing your courage was wasted. A horn sounded, signaling the beginning of combat, and Zethran attacked with terrifying speed. His forearms moved in a blur, striking from multiple angles simultaneously, and Daniel barely managed to dodge the first barrage. The second strike caught him across the chest, and he felt ribs crack from the impact. The force of the blow sent him flying backward, his body skidding across the sand before coming to a stop near the arena wall. The crowd roared with approval as Zethran raised his arms in victory, certain that the fight was already over. No being had ever survived one of his full-power strikes, and this frail human was surely finished. But Daniel was already pushing himself back to his feet, blood dripping from his mouth and his breathing labored. The pain was immense, but he had learned long ago how to push through pain, how to make his body obey despite its protests. Saras' expression shifted from triumph to confusion as the human stood upright. Impossible. Your bones should be shattered. Daniel spit blood onto the sand and raised his fists. Human bones are harder than you think. Now stop talking and fight. The champion charged again, this time with more caution, his forearms weaving patterns of attack designed to overwhelm any defense. Daniel took hits that would have killed most beings, his body absorbing punishment that seemed beyond any creature's ability to endure. But between the blows, Daniel was learning. He studied Zethran's movements, identifying the patterns, finding the weaknesses. Every species had vulnerable points, and the Cathari were no exception. He noticed that Zethran's exoskeleton was thinner at the joints, where flexibility was needed for movement. He saw that the champion favored his upper right arm, using it for the most powerful strikes. He observed that Cathari breathing was rapid, suggesting they were not built for extended combat. The fight continued for 30 minutes, then an hour, and the crowd grew quieter with each passing moment. They watched in disbelief as the human refused to stay down. Rising again and again, no matter how many times he was struck, Daniel was covered in blood now, his body a canvas of bruises and cuts, but his eyes remained focused and his spirit unbroken. He began to counterattack, targeting the joints he had identified, using his smaller size to slip beneath Zethran's powerful strikes. A kick to the champion's knee joint made him stumble for the first time in the entire match. A precise strike to the throat caused Zethran to gasp for breath. An elbow to the sensitive area beneath his upper arms sent waves of pain through the warrior's body. The crowd fell completely silent as they watched something unprecedented unfold. Their greatest champion was slowing, his movements becoming sluggish, while the broken human continued to move with determination that defied all. Understanding Zenre's attacks grew desperate and sloppy. He had never fought an opponent who could endure this much damage, never faced an enemy who simply refused to accept defeat. His strength was fading, his breathing becoming ragged, his confidence crumbling with each passing moment. 2 hours into the fight, Commander Zethran fell to his knees, his forearms hanging limp at his sides. He had given everything he had, pushed his body beyond any limit he had previously known. And still the human stood before him. Daniel swayed on his feet, barely conscious, held upright by nothing but pure willpower. He had broken bones throughout his body, internal bleeding that should have killed him, and wounds that would take months to heal. But he was standing, and his opponent was not. Yield, Daniel gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. This fight is over. Zethran looked up at the human with eyes filled with something his species rarely experienced. Respect mixed with fear. Slowly, painfully, the champion lowered his head in surrender. The arena was absolutely silent for a long moment. Then a single voice began to cheer. It was Queen Silthery herself, standing in her royal box and applauding the impossible victory she had just witnessed. One by one, other Kethari joined her, until the entire arena thundered, with approval for the human who had done what no one believed possible. Daniel allowed himself one small smile before his legs finally gave out and he collapsed onto the blood-soaked sand. He had won, though the cost had been nearly everything his body had to give, as medical teams rushed onto the arena floor to tend to both fighters. Queen Silthery descended from her box with an expression that none of her subjects had ever seen before. She was looking at the fallen human not as a curiosity or a prisoner, but as something far more significant. She had wanted to test the humans, to see if the scientists' reports were accurate. What she had witnessed exceeded even her darkest fears about what humanity was capable of. And now she had to decide what that meant for the future of her empire. The human had amazed her beyond all expectation, and for the first time in her reign, she was uncertain about what path to take. 3 weeks passed before Daniel could walk again without assistance. The Gethari medical technology was advanced beyond anything humans possessed, but even their sophisticated healing chambers could not instantly repair the damage his body had sustained in the arena. He spent his recovery time in a comfortable room rather than a prison cell. A change that told him something significant had shifted in how the Kethari viewed him. Servants brought him food and attended to his needs, and guards no longer watched him with contempt but with something closer to nervous respect. On the 22nd day of his recovery, a messenger arrived with a summons. Queen Silthery wished to speak with him privately in her personal chambers, an honor that had never been extended to any prisoner in the history of the Empire. Daniel, dressed in the fine garments that had been provided to him, and followed the messenger through the palace corridors. He moved slowly, his body still aching from injuries that would take months to fully heal. But he refused to show weakness before the Kethari who watched him pass. The Queen's private chambers were nothing like the grand throne room. They were warm and intimate, filled with plants from distant worlds and artwork that spoke of a soul more complex than her public image suggested. Soft light filtered through crystalline windows, casting gentle shadows across comfortable furniture. Queen Silthery sat near a window, gazing out at the stars, and she did not turn when Daniel entered. "Leave us," she commanded her guards, and they obeyed without question. Closing the door behind them for a long moment, neither spoke. Daniel remained standing, uncertain of proper protocol, until the Queen gestured to a seat across from her. "Sit, Sergeant Carter. We have much to discuss, and I would prefer we speak as equals rather than as ruler and subject." Daniel settled into the offered seat, wincing slightly as his healing ribs protested the movement. "I did not expect to hear those words from you, Your Majesty." The Queen finally turned to face him, and Daniel was surprised to see vulnerability in her ancient eyes. "What you did in the arena has changed how I see many things. I have spent days trying to understand what I witnessed, and I find myself with questions that only you can answer." "I will do my best to explain," Daniel replied. Genuinely curious about what the powerful ruler wanted to know, she leaned forward, her purple eyes searching his face. "Why did you continue fighting when victory was impossible? Any rational being would have yielded to avoid unnecessary suffering. Yet you stood again and again, accepting pain that should have been unbearable. I must understand why." Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. It was something he had never tried to put into words. This fundamental aspect of human nature that drove them to stand against impossible odds. "Among my people, there is a belief that some things are worth more than physical comfort or even survival," he began slowly. "We call it many names: honor, duty, courage, stubbornness. But at its core, it is the refusal to accept defeat simply because defeat seems inevitable." The Queen nodded, but pressed further. "But what is the purpose of such suffering? Commander Zethran would have granted you a quick death had you yielded. Instead, you chose hours of agony for a victory that seemed impossible. Where is the logic in that choice? Daniel smiled despite the pain that simple movement caused. Humans are not always logical, Your Majesty. We are creatures of emotion as much as reason. When I was lying on that sand with broken bones and blood filling my lungs, I was not thinking about the odds of victory. I was thinking about my home, my family, the people who were counting on me to represent humanity with honor. You fought for others, not yourself? The Queen asked, seeming to struggle with this concept. Partly, Daniel admitted. But I also fought because surrender is something that goes against everything I am. My grandfather taught me when I was young that a person can lose everything, their wealth, their health, their position, but no one can take their dignity unless they choose to give it away. Yielding to Zethran would have been giving away something precious, something that could never be reclaimed. Queen Silthery was silent for a long time, processing these words. Her empire had been built on the assumption that all species would eventually break under sufficient pressure. That survival instinct would always triumph over abstract concepts like honor. The humans challenged this fundamental belief. Tell me about your world, she requested. Not the scientific data, but what it means to grow up on such a dangerous planet. Daniel's expression grew thoughtful as memory surfaced. Earth is beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. I grew up in a region where summer brought storms that could destroy entire towns, and winter brought cold that could kill within hours. As children, we learned to swim in oceans filled with creatures that could eat us, to hike through forests where predators watched from the shadows. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But we also learned to find joy in that danger. Humans climb mountains that try to kill us, dive into depths that crush our bodies, explore caves that could trap us forever. We do these things not despite the danger, but because of it. Overcoming challenges is how we prove our worth to ourselves. Your species seeks out danger deliberately? The Queen's voice held disbelief. We do, Daniel confirmed. We have a saying that what does not kill us makes us stronger. Suffering and hardship are not things to be avoided, but opportunities to grow. Every scar I carry tells a story of a battle I survived and a lesson I learned. The Queen rose and walked to the window, looking out at the stars with new eyes. The Cathari evolved on a peaceful world. Our greatest challenges were social, not physical. We conquered the galaxy because we were more advanced, more organized, more unified than the species we encountered. But we never had to fight for survival the way humans have. She turned back to Daniel. I begin to understand why your species frightens my advisors so deeply. You are not merely difficult opponents. You are a different kind of being entirely, forged in conditions that would have destroyed any Cathari. We do not wish to be your enemies, Daniel said earnestly. Humans want peace. We want to explore the stars and find our place among the other species of the galaxy. But we will not abandon our colonies, and we will not bow to conquest. If war is the only option you offer us, we will fight until the last human draws breath. The Queen met his gaze with an intensity that seemed to look into his very soul. And you truly believe your species could win such a war? Even against our superior technology and numbers? Daniel shook his head. I do not know if we would win, but I know we would never surrender. And I know that the cost of defeating us would be greater than anything the Cathari have ever paid. Is that a price you are willing to accept, Your Majesty? For the first time since their conversation began, Queen Silthery smiled. It was not the sharp, predatory expression Daniel had seen before, but something warmer and more genuine. You are a remarkable being, Sergeant Carter. And your species is unlike anything I have encountered in my many years. I believe there may be another path forward, one that does not require the destruction you describe. She extended one of her 4 hands toward him. I would like to learn more about humanity, and perhaps Together, we can find a solution that benefits both our peoples. Daniel looked at the offered hand for a long moment, then reached out and took it. I would like that, Your Majesty. War should always be the last option, not the first. As they shook hands, both knew that something significant had begun. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it held the possibility of something other than conflict. 6 months had passed since Daniel Carter first stepped into the arena on Vareth Prime, and in that time, everything had changed. The war that seemed inevitable had been replaced by something no one in the galaxy had predicted. A partnership between two species that should have been mortal enemies. The diplomatic vessel carrying Queen Silthery's delegation entered Earth's solar system on a morning that would be remembered in history books for centuries to come. Watching from the observation deck of humanity's largest orbital station, Daniel felt a mixture of pride and nervousness that was difficult to describe. Ambassador Katie Morrison stood beside him, reviewing her notes for the 100th time. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a brilliant mind, chosen to represent humanity in these historic negotiations. I still cannot believe this is actually happening, she admitted, looking up from her tablet. 3 months ago, we were preparing for a war we could not win. Now we are welcoming the Cathari as potential allies. Daniel nodded, still marveling at the turn of events himself. Queen Silthery is different from what the intelligence reports suggested. She is wise enough to recognize that some victories are not worth their cost. The Cathari vessel docked with smooth precision, and the delegation that emerged was unlike anything the assembled humans had expected. Rather than armed warriors, they were scholars and diplomats. Led by Queen Silthery herself, in robes of peace rather than armor of war, Daniel stepped forward as the official liaison, a role he had never imagined holding. Your Majesty, welcome to Earthspace. Humanity is honored by your presence. The Queen inclined her head in greeting, a gesture of respect that caused whispers among the watching humans. Sergeant Carter, it is good to see you fully recovered. I have thought often about our conversations during these past months. Ambassador Morrison stepped forward and executed a formal bow. Queen Silthery, I am Ambassador Katie Morrison, authorized to speak on behalf of the United Earth Council. We are eager to begin discussions about peace between our peoples. The negotiations that followed were complex and often difficult. Centuries of misunderstanding and mistrust could not be erased in a single meeting, and both sides had demands that seemed impossible to reconcile. The Cathari wanted assurance that humanity would not expand aggressively into territory they considered their sphere of influence. The humans wanted guarantee that their existing colonies would remain free from Cathari interference. Both sides wanted respect and recognition as equals in a galaxy that had room for more than one great power. Daniel served as a bridge between the two delegations, helping to translate not just words but meaning. He explained human idioms that confused the Cathari translators and helped Ambassador Morrison understand the complex hierarchy of Cathari society during one particularly tense moment. When negotiations seemed ready to collapse over disputed territory in the Orion sector, Daniel requested a private meeting with Queen Silthery. Your Majesty, I need you to understand something about humans, he said when they were alone. We are not trying to challenge your empire or diminish your power. We are simply trying to protect our home and our people. The Queen studied him with those ancient purple eyes. And I need you to understand that the Cathari have never shared power with another species. What you are asking requires us to change fundamental beliefs about our place in the galaxy. Daniel leaned forward with intensity. Change is not weakness, Your Majesty. It is the ability to adapt that has allowed humanity to survive our death world and reach for the stars. Perhaps it is time for the Cathari to adapt as well. There was a long silence before Queen Silthery responded. You continue to amaze me, Sergeant. Very well. Let us find a path that allows both our peoples to grow without destroying each other. The breakthrough came 2 weeks later, when both sides agreed to establish a joint territory in the disputed region, administered by representatives from both species. It was an unprecedented arrangement that challenged everything both cultures believed about sovereignty and power on the day the treaty was signed. The orbital station was filled with beings from both species, watching as history was made. Ambassador Morrison and Queen Silthery placed their signatures on the document that would reshape the galaxy's political landscape. Today, we choose a different path. Queen Silthery announced to the assembled crowd. The Cathari Empire has conquered 47 worlds through force. But we have learned that true strength is not measured in ships or weapons. It is measured in the wisdom to recognize when fighting is not the answer. Ambassador Morrison added her own remarks. Humanity has always believed that we are stronger together than apart. Today, we extend that belief beyond our own species. May this alliance be the first of many steps toward a galaxy united in peace, rather than divided by war. The celebration that followed brought together beings who weeks earlier had been preparing to kill each other. Cathari warriors shared drinks with human soldiers. Scientists from both species discussed collaboration on technologies that could benefit everyone. And children from both worlds played together. Unaware of the historical significance of their innocent games, Daniel stood apart from the festivities, watching with a quiet satisfaction that went deeper than mere happiness. He had come to this place as a prisoner facing certain death, and now he stood as a symbol of what could happen when enemies chose understanding over conflict. Queen Silthery approached him, 2 glasses in her lower hands. "You seem troubled, Sergeant. Surely this is a moment for celebration." He accepted the offered glass and smiled. "Not troubled, Your Majesty. Just thinking about how strange life can be. A few months ago, I was preparing to die in your arena. Now, I am watching our peoples become allies." The Queen nodded, her gaze distant. "When you stood before me that first day, I saw only a primitive creature to be studied and discarded. I could never have imagined that you would change my understanding of the galaxy, and I could never have imagined that the Cathari would become humanity's greatest allies," Daniel replied. "I suppose we were both wrong in our assumptions. Perhaps that is the lesson," Queen Silthery said thoughtfully. "That the assumptions we hold most firmly are often the ones most in need of questioning." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration continue around them. Somewhere in the crowd, Ambassador Morrison was laughing at something a Cathari diplomat had said, and the sound of genuine joy filled the station. "I have one final question," the Queen said at last. "In the arena, when you were broken and bleeding and all hope seemed lost, what kept you standing? What thought gave you the strength to continue when your body had nothing left to give?" Daniel considered the question for a long moment before answering. "My grandfather used to tell me something when I was young, words I carried with me through every battle and every hardship I have ever faced." "What did he say?" The Queen asked. Daniel turned to look at her, his eyes holding the same determination that had allowed him to survive the impossible. He said that giving up was never an option. That no matter how dark things seemed, there was always a chance as long as you kept fighting. I believed him then, and I believe him now. Queen Silthery smiled, the expression warm and genuine. "Your grandfather was a wise being, and you have honored his memory with your actions." She raised her glass in a toast. "To the future, Sergeant Carter. May it be filled with more moments like this, and fewer like the arena." Daniel touched his glass to hers. "To the future, Your Majesty, and to all the impossible things that become possible when we choose to work together." As the celebration continued around them, both knew that challenges lay ahead. Alliances between species that had never trusted each other would be tested. Old prejudices would be difficult to overcome. And there would be those on both sides who opposed the peace they had worked so hard to achieve but watching humans and Cathari celebrate together, Daniel felt something he had not felt since his capture: hope. Hope that the galaxy could change, that enemies could become friends, and that the impossible was just another obstacle waiting to be overcome after all. Humans have been doing the impossible since the day they first stood upright on their death world and refused to die. This was simply one more challenge, and giving up was never an option.